and welcome back to Book Talk with Kara. And today I am delighted to introduce you to my friend Dan Walsh, and we have known each other for a number of years. Dan has been writing for a long time and is a award-winning, best-selling author of more than 20 books. And we're going to talk about his most recent book, The Perfect Stranger, but we're also going to talk about the process of trying to get some of his best books turned into movies. But Dan, do you want to take a moment just to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Well, I think thanks again for inviting me. It's great to see you again. Yes, Kara and I go way back. I think 2009 is when my
Yeah.
first novel came out, and it was called The Unfinished Gift. And I only had written it the year before, and I kind of had a unique experience in that it kind of took off right away. I mean, within just a few months of trying to get an agent, I got one of the best agents in the business who had a contract within 5 weeks with one of the best publishers in the business. And a year later, I'm having a hardback book in Barnes and Noble with my wife taking a picture, just like pinch me. I couldn't believe how quickly. And that kind of opened up and really launched things for me in a way that I didn't expect. But over the next 6 years, from 2009 to 2015, I published with my publisher 12 books and one with Guidepost, so 13 total traditionally. And most of those who've been paying attention would be aware of in that cycle, when I started in 2009, everything was the static normal pattern I think it had been for a century.
Yeah.
My first royalties, for example, ebooks were like less than 3% of the income. But before by 2012, I think Amazon had kind of it's like the Titanic hit the iceberg, but took 3 years to sink instead of 3 hours. But Amazon just came in the scene and just you could just tell little by little was just chipping away at everything, and the whole publishing world kind of changed over that period of years I was. So by the midway point, 2012, I think it was when uh, that's when I think they came out with Kindle for $99, and it was the number one Christmas present that year. They sold millions. And guess what happened? All the people who were buying print books that year for Christmas took all their Christmas money and bought ebooks. So suddenly ebooks were on the map and on the radar. And I remember my publisher was telling me, I think they printed like, I don't know, maybe 30, 40,000 copies of the Reunion was the one that came out that year. And the sales were great, but they had tens of thousands of boxes in the warehouse that didn't move because people were buying ebooks instead. So the total
Mhm.
sales were great, but unfortunately for the publisher, they're left with not just my publisher, it was happening throughout the industry. And that kind of became the beginning, I think, of the indie self-publishing kind of craze that has, competed with traditional for the last several years. And I stayed with my publisher from until 2014, and by that point I had 13 novels. But I went from 2012 to 2014. I was beginning to evaluate the idea of going on my own. And when it came time to renew with the publisher, uh, I guess the easiest way to say it was, it was back then, the big thing in all the conferences and with the publisher was all branding. Is it still a big thing?
Oh, yeah. It's still, what's your brand? Who
It
are
dominated.
you?
I would
What
say
can people expect? Yeah.
yeah, branding kind of dominated, and it kind of, and for me, it was way too confining. I think if you had to say what's the main reason, because a lot of people thought I had to be crazy to leave that situation voluntarily. It's one thing if you're dropped, but I actually chose not to stay. And it was really probably because of after several years of the branding, it was way too confining for me as a writer. And it was risky, I know, but I also was able to see how many more people were buying their books from online than were. I'd go to all the bookstores wherever I travel. My wife and I always go to the bookstore, and of course we're going to go down the aisle and we're going to find my books, and she's going to take a picture, and we're going ah. But then we kept noticing that we are the only ones in the aisle, And when I would talk to people in conferences and ask them, "How many of you are starting to buy your books online?" I mean, all the hands are going up. And so I felt like the risk wasn't that great because Amazon had already kind of done its worst. It had already taken its hold and shaken the publishing world. So the difference for me was because I'm the breadwinner, I'm the primary income. I had to evaluate what's best for me financially, and I would say both financially and creatively, it was better for me to go out on my own. And
Mhm.
so I made the leap amicably. I mean, I have fond memories of my years there. I don't have any hard feelings or look back at with any great regret. The thing I miss the most, obviously, is all the camaraderie of all the people
Yeah.
at the conferences and the publishing team and all that. I really miss that. But for me, other than that, both financially and creatively, it was a really good move for me to go out on my own and become an indie. And since then, I've published 16 more novels, a total of 29. The one I'm working on now is the 30th, which is crazy to me. But the books that I've been able to publish were ones that my publisher didn't want me to publish because they weren't part of my brand. Uh,
Yeah. No,
so
because you write really interesting stories that are kind of all over the map. I mean, your first one was The Unfinished Gift, which was this incredibly sweet World War II story, which is the one I fell in love with because at the time I was writing World War II and romantic suspense. And it's just a story that's never left me. You've had The Reunion, which was kind of a Vietnam story before people were thinking about Vietnam stories. And then you've written romantic suspense, you've written historical. You are you
yeah,
had some that have a little bit of what I would call magical realism, sort of.
I think
Um,
what they were going for was after the second book, the follow-up book to Unfinished Gift called The Homecoming, when that book came out, all the reviewers started comparing me to Nicholas Sparks.
yeah,
And some of them actually called me the Nicholas Sparks of Christian fiction. And so my publisher kind of latched onto that and thought, that's your brand. We're going to market you as the Nicholas Sparks of Christian fiction. No, I had not even read any of his books. I'd seen a couple of his movies. So I got the link, why they were linking me together with him. Um, but the problem, of course, again, is they were saying, well, Nicholas Sparks doesn't write books in series, and he only writes standalone. And also, I had just written the Deepest Waters. You know, it takes like a year from when you write from when it comes out. Well, in that year, I'd written this wonderful story from 1857, a
yeah,
total departure from the others, right? World War II, 1857. And so they kind of said, well, now that you're being compared to Nicholas Sparks, we don't want you to write any more books older than World War II. So I actually had a sequel to this Deepest Waters all ready to go, and they turned it down. I've since written it, but that was the point when I started to realize the branding thing was becoming a kind of a like I'm a horse that was running free, and now I've got this saddle and bit, and and I tried to stay with it. I mean, I didn't not like the books I was writing. I just had other things I wanted to write that I wasn't allowed to. And since quote being freed up to write whatever I want, I think I've proven that the branding thing is really overrated because the books that they turned down have become the series of shelter dog books that they rejected I've sold more of those probably than all of my books. You know, they're my very best sellers. And they said, yeah, people aren't buying dog books right now. And the suspense series, they're like, no, well, you're not a suspense writer. That's not your brand. You're the Nicholas Sparks guy. Well, I've sold, you know, I've written two 4-book series on the suspense series, and they're selling like crazy, better than my books did at Revell. So for me, again, I don't have, I'm glad I was able to make that call to make the change. Uh, and it was financially and creatively was a good move for me. Like I said, I still have very fond memories. I do miss the camaraderie, but I have to say that the branding thing, I don't know how people would brand me now. I don't think nobody's asking, and I'm not. When I usually don't say what's your brand, I don't even hear that question anymore. So
yeah. Well, it seems like the readers have gone with you and that they just like your books, which is fantastic.
and
Because you
my
are
conviction,
a
my
great
feeling is that
writer.
my conviction, I guess you say, is that all readers have one thing in mind, fiction readers especially, a great story well told. That's it.
Yeah,
And they don't really much care. Like my readers read the ones that were like when I first started the suspense book. I'm like, okay, I've got 13 books in this direction. Will they stay with me? The answer
yeah.
was yes. And they've stayed with me for 8 more books, and now they're waiting for the next one, right? So I just think it's probably one of those things where what they really want is they want to, when they start reading a book, they want to get hooked on and they want to keep reading it, and they don't want to put it down until it's finished. And then when it's finished, they wish they want to keep reading more, right? That's the experience they're looking for. So I think that's really more important in the end is how gripping is the story and how exciting and gripping and all of that than so much the brand idea. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about your books and what you write, what can readers expect from you? What is that thing that they can always count on when they are looking at a Dan Walsh book?
I would say by judging by the reviews, and I just did the math on it since since my own publisher, I have to do all my stats myself. I have over 65,000 reviews on Amazon.
That's amazing.
Obviously, don't read them all, but I always read, like, and there's a very consistent pattern in the reviews of what readers seem to like the most about my books. And I would say at the top of the list would be the characters. Uh, I would call character-driven stories. I My characters come alive at some point while I'm writing, and once they come alive while I'm writing, they're in charge of how the story goes, not so much the plot. I follow a plot, I create a synopsis, but the characters to me are paramount in terms of storytelling. Um,
Okay.
so that would be first. And I would also say, I my whole goal is that people keep turning the pages. I don't have any blah blah blah. My goal is to
Yeah,
cut out all the blah blah blah, so there's no skipping parts. And that once they start reading, they don't want to stop until the end. And if they don't read to the end, I'm sunk financially. you know.
exactly.
So
No, and that's when I think about your books and the ones that I've loved and that I've read, the thing that it I think of with a Dan Walsh book is the plotting's tight, the characters are amazing, and there is a Nicholas Sparks type of feel to them, but it's because it's that you fall in love with the characters and you want to know what's going to happen next. And that'll carry over whether it's the suspense or whether it's the historical, but that you're just really pulled in. So you've had something that's on the bucket list for a lot of authors happen to you, that you've had a couple of your books optioned for movies. What has that journey been like?
well, the first one would be the two that we've actually kind of touched on would be the reunion, which is really, I would say, of all my books, people have actually said with that book that they've urged me to put on the cover, please put some kind of sticker. Don't read the last 50 pages in public, because
Oh,
everybody who reads it generally, including me when I'm writing it, you're crying, you're sobbing. It's a
yeah.
good cry. It's not like the dog died kind of cry.
It's
Uh,
not a love story. It's a happy ending,
yeah, it's a
but it
happy,
does touch you deeply.
it's very emotionally impacting ending, and that's seems what really, and I think that's what grabbed the guy, the producers that read it. They were two guys that had been working in Hollywood for years. They just seen the movie God's Not Dead and were surprised at how well it did. And
Mhm.
back then, a lot of Christian movies didn't do so well financially. And they were intrigued by it because they're believers working in an unbelieving environment, and they wanted to do a faith-based. So it's a long story, but wound up getting hold of the reunion when they're in this search for what book is going to be their book to be their first faith-based. And they both read the reunion, and like most people, at the end they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is a crazy great story. This is our story." So they contacted me. I wasn't like I was searching.
Yeah.
They contacted me asking, "Is this available?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's available." So that began a process of them wanting to get the movie made. Well, it just so happened the year after that, the guy who was writing the script named Nick Vallelonga, he was working with these other guys on a story that he had written. And it just took off. Paramount picked it up and it became an Oscar winning Best Picture of 2018. The Green Book is the story. And Nick won an Oscar for the Green Book screenplay and as a producer. So that kind of they kind of said, let's hold off on the reunion right now and ride this wave, because in the end, it might help us get the reunion made with all this publicity about. And it seemed great to me. What nobody could foresee, of course, is it took a couple of years, but they were having people, the top A-list actors reading the script. But what happened was, I guess when COVID happened, it was just on the
Mm,
verge of getting made, and the whole of Hollywood got sunk. And unfortunately, in the 2 years plus that COVID was sinking Hollywood, the project got tangled up legally in a quagmire because of a
uh,
distribution company went out of business, and it just seemed like it wasn't going to get made. And I almost like gave up, even though COVID was gone a couple of years. So, but then back in August, the producers of the Reagan movie, which was I love that movie, came out, and it was a big movie, a very successful movie. Well, they loved the reunion. They knew about Nick, knew about they looked at it and said, well, we want to buy the rights and get this project unstuck. And they created a new LLC to begin to get the project back underway. So now it has a good chance of happening again.
I
Meanwhile,
love that.
yeah,
It's
meanwhile,
like just the story of trying to get it made is
oh
almost a
yeah,
movie.
it's been a 7-year saga. And meanwhile, my last year, my son, wants to make movies, he's made two. They weren't faith-based; they were like thrillers. And he had a young production team. And they had one movie that fell through. Their third movie had fallen through for a number of reasons. And over that holidays last year, I just kind of challenged my son, hey, why don't you give them the unfinished gift and see what they think? It's holidays, maybe they'll read it because it's a holiday book. They both read it, the production guys that he worked with, in his movies, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, why are we doing anything else? We should be working on this." You know,
That's awesome.
Dad's open, so they just dropped everything and said, "This is what we're going to spend our time is getting this movie made." They felt like this is like a Christmas classic, so they're not, I would say they're on target. They're sending it out. The script is done. My son wrote the script. He knocked it out of the park. It was a wonderful script. They're actually getting ready to send it out to a lot of the A-list Christian faith-based actors that you would know. They'll be sending them out to these guys. The producer will be doing that in the next couple of weeks. He was all set to do it when the fires happened, and
Oh gosh.
that just delayed it a little bit. But now he's back on track. It's possible that this unfinished gift could very well get made before the reunion. They're really moving much more faster and rapidly towards that goal. So it's been pretty exciting. I mean, working with my son and his team, because they're all in their 30s, right? And it's like I feel like I'm the old guy, and now all of a sudden I'm relevant, and they're
Yeah.
very
Oh, that's so
into,
fun.
yeah. And they actually, now that they want to make, once this gets made, they said we're just going to keep it going. We want to make your dad's books as many as we can make after that. So we'll see.
That's amazing. Well, and I think that what's fun is, you've seen all the different sides of publishing. You've seen the traditional, you do the indie, you're seeing the movie making side. And I think it's fascinating for readers and for other writers just to see all the different stages and phases of it. But where can readers interact with you? Where are you? Where's your website? Where are you on social?
Well, I'm on Facebook every day, several times a day. If you send me if you're interested in my books, I mean, I think I have like 2,800 friends, and I think 100 of them are actually friends. The rest are all folks related to my books. So if I can tell when you send me a friend request that you're somebody who's interested in books and whatever, I'll probably say yes if you don't look scary. You know? And so, but I also have, if they want to go on my website, I have a newsletter. All the people on my newsletter get the first of anything. As a matter of fact, once the movies start, I'm going to keep a journal that's on my going out to my newsletter. I don't put my newsletter out very often, but you can go on my www.danwalshbooks.com, and right on the homepage you could sign up for my newsletter and actually get one of 2 free books just for signing up. And that's one way to stay in touch. The Facebook's the other way. I'm also on the other platforms, but not as much. Like Instagram and Twitter, now X. But I think really Facebook is probably where I spend that and emails.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. It's so fun to connect. And your most recent book is The Perfect Stranger. But I guarantee, no matter what you like to read, Dan has probably written a book, and he's written a book that you will enjoy. And you can find him on Amazon. And like you said, you can interact with him on Facebook, but he also has a website where you can check out his books and then go over to Amazon and purchase them. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Carol.